We're going to go back to the story on the nation's report card and the historic hit to learning students have suffered across the country because of the COVID pandemic, when a big portion of several school years are either online only or some sort of hybrid. We're going to bring in Joe Paris now because you asked this question to a couple people around the state of Idaho who would know this kind of information, and also based on what we learned last night during the superintendent for public instruction debate, kind of how big of a hit did we take here in Idaho?
So every few years, there's a test that's done nationwide, and it's known as the Nation's Report Card, or the NAEP. And during that assessment, 4th and 8th graders across the country, all 50 states, they're tested on 2 different topics, reading and mathematics. And the last time this test was done was in 2019. So you can imagine, since 2019, a lot has happened, and there's been a lot of people talking about, learning loss during COVID. So they actually just put out the results for the latest NAEP. And what we saw is, expectedly, across the country and in the state of Idaho, test scores for math and reading in 4th and 8th grade, they were down across the board. Something interesting to note, though, about the state of Idaho is that they weren't as much down in Idaho as they were across the nation. And really, in 4th and 8th grade, Idaho students in math and reading are really right at the national average. Some 8th grade math scores are a little bit higher. Some 4th grade reading scores are a little bit lower. But the bottom line here is that Idaho really is right in the middle of the pack in terms of average scores just on this NAEP test. But it really rounds off a conversation about learning loss. And there's been talk for several years now where we have an idea between parents and students and administrators that there probably is some type of learning loss. Well, now we know for a fact that the data's here. And we know that 4th graders, 8th graders, and really everyone in the K through 12 and college system, they need a little bit of extra help. So last night, Brian, of course, right here on Channel 7, we had the debate for the superintendent of public instruction, Republican Debbie Crutchfield, Democrat Terry Gilbert. Now, the two debated for an hour here last night, again, ahead of the November election. And if you want to watch the whole debate before you make your decision on who you're going to vote for in a little less than 2 weeks, that's available right now, ktvb.com and the KTV YouTube page. But now that we know the data's here, we know about the learning loss, we asked both candidates last night, what is their specific plan to address learning loss? Debbie Crutchfield talks about some specific curriculum ideas, while Mr. Gilbert talked about staffing the classrooms. Here's what both had to say about learning loss in Idaho.
I'm going to start off with back to basics, focusing on literacy and how we make sure that our kids know how to read. There's been significant monies put towards that, but we're still not seeing the outcomes that we hope to have. Focusing on professional development and ensuring that we have valuable training for our teachers that translate into effective strategies in the classroom.
We can call upon our retired teachers to come back into the schools, work with our students, and we can ask compassionate adults in the community also to come into the schools to work. I don't think the burden should fall only on our teachers. They're overburdened now. They are overworked now. So that is my plan, to bring other people into the school setting.
So we know that as a state and really as a country over the next several years, we're going to really find out what the true effects of the COVID pandemic were in terms of learning loss and in terms of learning impacts. It's interesting, though, because we spoke with the candidates last night, COVID, learning loss, all that very serious. But there's also been some things from the COVID era, the COVID pandemic era, that has changed in schools. Things like remote learning, things like different ways to collaborate across the classroom. So it'll be interesting to see whoever's elected the superintendent of public instruction, what their idea is in terms of attacking this head on, and exactly what metrics they do with that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here with you, Joe, because you said we did not drop as far as, say, the rest of the country when it comes to 4th and 8th graders, which is where that benchmark is to kind of see where they stand in those 4 years. But is that because we didn't have that far to fall kind of thing? I mean, our test scores haven't been in the top 10.
So in the NAEP testing specifically, again, specifically the Nation's Report Card, really for the last 10 years, Idaho's really done a good job of staying in the middle of the pack. Not too far ahead, not too far below. Of course, some years there's some outliers, but for the most part, when you talk with the experts today, Idaho's really been in the middle of the pack, really right around that average. So what the results tell us about this latest report card is that Idaho, in terms of the bell curve, hasn't changed that much. We're really the same in the pack as we have been for the last 10 years. It is interesting, though, and I did ask our experts today, is it a good metric to say, well, Idaho, yes, we're down, but we're not as down. Is that a good metric? And they say it actually is, and it's a very qualified thing that's in this pandemic era, because nationwide, again, scores did go down in math and science, in math and reading, I should say. But in Idaho, maybe not as bad in other places. So.
It's kind of what we talked about going into this, though, was like, that was expected. When we shut down and said, you got to go home, and then we got to figure out how we're going to teach online with 30 kids logging in and computer issues and all, there was going to be this loss of something. We just didn't know the extent of it. But to hear this historic loss and all that, I mean, it's a good metric to go, wait a second, we've got some ground to cover here.
Yeah, and we'll see over the next few years what more metrics come out and kind of how techniques in teaching changes, because as we saw, some had put out the idea like everyone should have to redo the year they're in. We didn't do that. So it'd be interesting to find out when, the class of 2030, when they're graduating, what do their scores look like? What does their work process look like compared to maybe the class of 2020?
All right, Joe, thank you very much for that in-depth explanation.
Yes, of course.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we're going to try to figure that out. All right, we'll be right back.